When most people think of Geneijin and why it is so strong, they think of combos, whether that's from 1, 2, 3, shoulder, standing medium kick, crouching medium kick, or other ways that you can combo, like standing medium punch. Right? So all of these things are super important as far as getting damage against your opponent, but a majority of the time, these things only really come from Okizeme situations where you are close to your Geneijin, or when you parry an opponent's move and then are able to punish with something that activates into Geneijin into a combo. Right? And both of these are very important as far as maximizing the character. But this particular thing is not necessarily what makes Yun and Geneijin so hard to deal with and so oppressive. It is actually the fact that if your opponent is blocking, they have to guess the entire time that you are doing pressure. Regardless of what type of pressure you're doing, that particular type of pressure gives your opponent a point of interaction where they can choose to make a decision, and maybe it's useful for them and it is what they're looking for. Like if I'm going to try to continually pressure my opponent and then go for a Zempo, but if Ken back throws me here, that's great for him, right? I wasted the rest of my Geneijin bar, and there's not really much that I can do. Or they can jump the Zempo, or Ken can press a button and interact with that Zempo. But that Zempo is actually the building block to why Geneijin is so oppressive. Without Zempo, obviously, Yun doesn't really have a whole lot available to him when dealing with opponents that are just going to crouch block forever. The only other choices that he has is something like Universal Overhead or Forward Medium Kick. But Forward Medium Kick isn't as strong if you don't have access to Zempo to take advantage of the extra damage that you're getting from making your opponent respect that move. So Zempo really is kind of the be-all, end-all of how you make your opponent respect your decisions in Geneijin. Zempo really is the boogeyman of Geneijin pressure. And the reason for that is because if I do an immediate Zempo, and I do a slightly unoptimized combo, I get 39 damage and 26 meter. If I do it at the very end, so the last timing where I can possibly get an ender, I'm able to get 37 damage and 35 meter. So there are different, more optimized routes for earlier Geneijin Zempos, where you get more damage and equal meter to you doing it at the very end. But keeping things very basic, everything is about the same. So if you were instead to do something in the middle, it's 35 damage and 34 meter. So everything is within striking distance of one another as far as the damage and meter goes, if done relatively optimally. So your opponent needs to worry about you Zempoing basically at every point possible. And this is where you get to basically start your mind games with your opponent. Are you going to Zempo immediately? Are you going to Zempo late? Are you going to do something in the middle? But without Zempo, like I've said, the only thing that you have available to you to open up your opponent is something like a Universal Overhead. Your opponent has no ability to really interact, or they have no reason to interact, I should say, without Zempo. They don't need to press a button, they don't need to jump, they don't need to attempt to throw you. None of these things occur if Zempo doesn't exist. Option selects to deal with Zempo are not foolproof, but They do exist. The first one that we're going to talk about is the block late tech. And basically, this is the same thing that you would do when you are defending in general, where you would block, and then late tech, where your goal is to get a throw yourself if they don't actually go for a throw, or they delay too much, or whatever. So in this case, I'm able to pressure Ken, he'll block it. If I leave a gap or try to walk forward for Zempo, he will attempt to back throw me. He will block otherwise. The next one that exists is mashing buttons, where if I go to pressure Ken and I do a block string, him mashing down jab will never come out until there is enough space for it to come out. Because of moves like crouching light kick being plus 13, these sort of option selects exist to take advantage of how plus that move is and how much movement is necessary in order to get that Zempo. So if I try to Zempo Ken here, he can just hit me on my way in. Right? This is a lot better for characters like Chun-Li with a down jab that ends up being a frame trap into something that can go into super or something, right? But it still exists, and it's something that you need to be respectful of as Yun. And the last one is a little bit harder to showcase, but I'll show the basic inputs. Basically here, you will block, you'll jump back, or you'll neutral jump, and then you'll block again. So this is essentially guard jumping in the middle of Geneijin. However, you're taking advantage of the same thing that we showed before, where Ken is trying to back throw at specific timings, but instead of doing the back throw, they're going to jump where the Zempo would come. It's a lot harder to do optimally, but it does exist as well. All of these things lose to frame traps. Right? So there is some inherent risk behind going for any of these option selects, or trying to interact at any point with any attack or throw or whatever. But without your opponent actually fearing Zempo, then there's no reason for them to actually do these things, and your frame traps will get you nowhere. Because if they don't do these sort of option selects or don't try to interact, and you just frame trap them forever, you get a Zempo that leaves you outside of Geneijin at the very, very end, at the best. Otherwise, you're going to be in situations like this. Where, in your best case scenario, that shoulder is still in Geneijin and pushes you back to this sort of point and lets you control the space. But outside of those scenarios, your opponent needs to commit to blocking in order to make that happen. Going for these option selects, eventually that throw is going to come out. Eventually that button is going to come out. And it's either going to be successful or it's not, right? So this is what you need to take advantage of in basically using Zempo as a conditioning tool. Conditioning with Zempo is a very confusing topic because the whole point of using Zempo is to force interaction points. The problem is there are 10 different interaction points. You can Zempo from the very beginning in basically every half second until your Geneijin ends. With that last Zempo timing ending with you out of Geneijin. So, regardless of when you're Zempoing, there's still another choice that can be had. Instead of me Zempoing at the end there, if my opponent stands up and think that I'm going to do something and they're going to try to tech my forward throw that might come, or back throw my Zempo, then crouching medium kick into dash punch works, right? And realistically, that gives me the corner skill, gives me a knockdown, gives me meter. Or they have to worry about me doing an instantaneous Zempo. And the combo that comes with it. They take about 25% of their life. And they know that regardless of when they actually get Zempo'd, between 0 and 4 seconds, that they're going to take about the same amount of damage. So how do you actually go about generating these points of interaction? Because there are so many different timings that your opponent needs to think about that realistically from the get-go, their mental stack should be very full, because at any point they need to worry about the Zempo. While this might be true that the mental stack may be full, it also may not. And this is where we're going to get a little bit philosophical. So I want you to think about why you would interact. What would incentivize you to actually take the risk to press a button or back throw or whatever? So take a second to think about it. Okay. So regardless of what you thought, realistically the answer is interacting doesn't make a whole lot of sense without a lot more context. Because if you take into consideration purely the risk reward, as a defender, back throwing, pressing a button, or parrying in the wrong direction yields the same outcome. And this all has to do with frame traps, right? Because frame traps would be blue parryable. If you try to parry at the wrong time, and they're still doing their block string, that block string can turn into an actual combo conversion, right? So choosing to parry, whether that's high or low, is also a risk, because the Yun player can go from one type of pressure into another. You don't know if he's going to do standing medium punch, crouch light kick, etc. Or if you don't know if he's going to go from that into crouch light kick, or turn into Daipon loop pressure, or whatever, right? There's a lot of things that you need to consider when choosing to interact. What type of pressure is he doing? How close is he? Can he threaten Zempo? What am I scared of? All of that stuff, right? But at a very base level, if you are trying to interact, right, then you have to worry about high frame traps, and low frame traps. That low frame trap gave me 70 damage as opposed to 37, which is almost double. Just barely under, right? So, yeah, you get the idea. It's usually just going to be better to take the actual Zempo itself. Because let's say your mindset is that you think that your character is better on Oki even when you're knocked down. Like Ken, as an example, has more options against Yun than other characters. He has heavy punch DP and stuff that Yun needs to respect because it's invulnerable, super, and all that stuff. But by you getting frame trapped, even if you can give away the actual life, it's still a huge risk to do so, right? Giving 70 damage versus 37, big difference. So, from the defender's point of view, you're almost always at a disadvantage. So taking the Zempo usually makes the most sense. Unless you start to take player tendencies into consideration. So when you take into consideration player tendencies, this is where things get a little different. Because, as an example, I can do Dekai here, and Ken can super me if he thinks that I'm going to walk for Zempo or press buttons or whatever. Now, as you can see here, I traded with Geneijin. So in this exact scenario, if Ken does not have a 1.5 meters total at the very minimum, Ken going for this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because if this trade occurs, he can EXDP. And it will combo, technically. Otherwise, he's just putting himself at slight advantage, where Yun has a crouching light kick that is 2 frames of startup. And it is super priority. So, like, this isn't the best scenario, right? But if you're taking the context clue into consideration and you have a meter and a half where the Dekai is going to happen, it could be worth going for, depending on the scenario, right? So if the Yun player likes to go for Zempo specifically at the latest possible moment, this is something that the defender can take advantage of depending on how consistently the Yun player goes for that. But on the flip side, the Yun player can also use that particular timing of latest possible Zempo where you can get an ender as a way to frame trap his opponent that is trying to back throw him into the corner or press a button or whatever. So this is where the mind games really begin. When the Yun player makes decisions that allow for the opponent to actually choose to make actual meaningful interaction choices. Because if you're just doing things in a way that makes it so that your opponent is guessing every 0.5 seconds as to what's going to happen, it's almost never going to be in their favor to even attempt to interact. So if you are not giving them context clues as the Yun player as to when things are going to happen, then the likelihood of them interacting is a lot less. At least against a lot of strong players. But the chance of them interacting is always going to be there. So doing frame trap into frame trap into frame trap still is a thing you see happen all the time. Even at the highest level, you'll see Sho do this, and he'll end his Geneijin and have nothing to really show for it, other than a little bit of meter from his opponent blocking his move. Which, as you can see, depending on how greedy you are and what the actual opponent can do, may be something that can be punished. So it's very nuanced as far as giving your opponent just enough information to make them want to interact versus the actual risk reward. Because in most cases, that risk reward is still going to say, give them the Zempo. Timing variance or lack of timing variance is probably the most important thing as far as incentivizing interaction from your opponent. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the latest Zempo timing that can still get you an ender, because this is the most consistently used timing across all Yun players. Regardless of what you do before that timing exists, you still get that last situation that forces potential rock, paper, scissors between you and your opponent. So this particular timing is very important because it is the last possible timing that you can actually Zempo your opponent. So because of that, as long as you have a higher weighting mentally to Zempo versus frame trap, it incentivizes your opponent to attempt to interact, whether that's press a button or jump or back throw, whatever. So you can take this or take advantage of this, and against players that are less risk averse, that are not going to just take the Zempo, you can add in more frame traps, but you do so at the risk of either them parrying them or them blocking them and being forced into one last RPS based on positioning. So depending on what frame trap you use, some are going to be better than others. So in this situation, if I use close standing medium kick, I have to walk forward to be able to use it again. This means that my most likely scenario here is after this is blocked, I have either crouching medium kick, or I have micro walk medium fierce back fierce, or I have fierce punch. Obviously there's sweep and a couple other things, but after this, you know, micro walk into this is still very possible, or walking into a range where you know that most of the buttons that your opponent is going to hit are low parryable, like crouching MP or crouching MK or whatever, against Ken specifically, can be a viable option as well. You know, boom boom, these sort of a thing. So you have to be understanding of all of your different options if your frame trap is blocked, so that you can continue on with at least more pressure. But in the worst case scenario, your frame trap is blocked, whether that is close standing medium kick or a like crouching medium kick into shoulder or something, and you still have corner pressure against your opponent. If you are successful, obviously you get more damage in meter than you would off the Zempo, and the Zempo can be very powerful. The downside is that depending on the exact timing of your Zempo, if you're doing it, you know, slightly too late, you're going to be out of Geneijin when this happens, if you do it a little bit too late. In which case, some characters' jumping moves will allow them to combo into something. You know, Dudley doing jump roundhouse into super, you know, Ken doing jump back roundhouse into super. There's other examples, right? But because of how consistent this timing is as far as the trying to force interaction, or how consistent the Zempo is from this timing, is really the main reason why a lot of opponents choose to interact here. So there are two timings that kind of go hand in hand that are also important, especially if you have the higher end execution. And this is instantaneous Zempo and single hit Zempo. Regardless of character, these two timings can deal significantly more damage than the later timings in Geneijin, as far as when you're able to get your Zempo. So as example, 51 damage, 27 meter. And 43 damage, 35 meter. These are just examples against Ken. They exist against the entire cast. So if your execution and combo routing is sort of up to snuff, then this will be a better timing for you than potentially other Yuns. But regardless, making it so that your opponent needs to respect this early is also extremely important if you want to do frame traps in the earlier portions of your Geneijin pressure. Because if they don't have a reason to think that a Zempo is going to happen, then before like 2 seconds in, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to be pressing anything. The next timing I want to talk about is 2 seconds in. So this is an example, does 36 damage, 34 meter. It's still not really fully optimized as far as the maximum damage that you can do against Ken. But to give you an idea, it is 1 less damage and 1 less meter than the very late Zempo. The important part about this is that if you are going for the latest possible Zempo, it requires you to do it at basically 4 seconds in, right? You're doing this at like 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds in. This gives you approximately 2.5 or 2 to 2.5 seconds for you to mix your opponent up. So, as soon as they respect that Zempo can come at this timing, they then have to worry about frame trap at that timing, which opens up another frame trap before you even get to the point where you get a final frame trap or Zempo. But if you don't show the Zempo in the middle of your Geneijin, like early, your opponent doesn't have a reason to press buttons until later, right? So you then have the ability to get 3 different timings for your combos, and they all yield very similar or exact to what you would get at the very end. So, 2 seconds in, 2.5 seconds in, 3 seconds in, 3.5 seconds in, 4 seconds in. You have essentially 5 timings that you still can mix your opponent up, as long as you're willing to show that earlier Zempo is going to come and not just immediate or late. If you don't have these sort of mid-timing Zempos, then it's a little bit harder to force frame traps against your opponent. But not everyone wants to do that. And that's another important aspect to things, is that because these are the 3 timings that are best, doesn't mean that every player wants to use all of them at all times. Obviously, some players like to use specific timings more than others. But even though that's the case, and we'll go over some of that later off of different string pressure, which is some of what differentiates how players go for different timings, I want to go over some important nuances for how you're actually frame trapping your opponent, or how you can make your opponent understand a Zempo is coming, specifically if you are looking to Zempo into a frame trap more often than not, or make them guess between the two. And yeah. So, I want to talk a lot about frame traps and making your opponent expect Zempo. And they really go hand in hand, because some of the moves that are best for frame traps are actually really good at opening up the ability to make the opponent think Zempo or a tick into Zempo is going to come. Before we get into that, I want to talk about something that I've been calling recovery canceling for a long time. So colloquially, it's called recovery canceling. What this is, on point blank, I had the Kai. I'm 144 pixels away from Ken. Do the same thing. I recovery cancel, or I act as soon as possible and micro walk forward. I'm at 100 pixels. Basically, what happens is the game tries to force the entirety of the recovery animation, even if you can act before the animation is full, or completed, I should say. So this gives you the sort of false ability to do things earlier, but it's technically you doing them as early as possible. And this all comes from basic movement. So you can recovery cancel backward, you can recovery cancel forward, and technically you can do it with crouch or with buttons in some regards, but it's mostly done with movement, usually with a forward walk. This, in particular, is really important for something like crouching light kick. Because the only way for crouching light kick to actually be a block string is if I'm recovery canceling and getting that micro walk to keep the space that I need, and me being plus 13 allows me to do this. This is also what allows all the different option selects against Geneijin, where you're trying to use crouching light kick as a tool to get back in for Zempo. But not every button is made the same. Let's start with a bunch of buttons that have one characteristic that is in common. Their startup and active frame. Standing light kick, close standing medium punch, crouching medium kick, and then we also have crouching medium punch. All are 3 frame startup, active on frame 4. Crouching medium punch is plus 12, crouching medium kick is plus 7, close standing medium punch plus 4, standing light kick plus 9. The important part about these moves is that the less plus that they are, the earlier you can act by moving forward. So, just like the Kai, where this is plus 6, you can force specific things to be either frame traps or block strings using the different plus frames of these moves. So it's impossible for you to standing medium punch being +4 and then immediately walk forward for a Zempo or, another move, because your opponent will be able to act by the time that you've moved enough, essentially. So frame trapping with a close standing medium punch requires you to basically not move, in most cases. So that move is a little bit special, because when you are doing your pressure, you can use a close standing medium punch as an easy way to get back into Zempo. If you're already in range for close standing medium punch, though, you're usually already in range to Zempo. So this is just a type of tick that will allow you to easily get a Zempo on your opponent, while also specifically opening up frame traps against them. Standing light kick works in a similar way, except really far away. So in a lot of cases, you'll see players like Yakun do crouching light kick, light kick, light kick, and then stand light kick. And they'll use stand light kick because it's +9. It hits a lot farther away, and it also forces a easier frame trap scenario, or a block string, or it gives them the opportunity to micro walk Zempo really easily. Right? So this also works off of things like Dekai and to walk into range into a button. Like standing light kick gives me the opportunity to walk in again. Whereas something like this opens up far MP, where far MP has relatively quick startup as well. In 3 frames active, or active on frame 4, and then it's +13. So like this is a move that is also easy to frame trap if you let it fully recover before your next decision. So regardless, standing light kick is probably the best tool when it comes to forcing your opponent to make a decision, especially for playing against like Chun-Li. This is +11 against Chun-Li, and you'll see Yakun use this move as a way to set up, is the Chun-Li going to press jab or not? Because after the standing light kick, it's really easy to do standing medium kick afterward. So let me put Ken to mash buttons again. Something like this, right? So I'm able to make my opponent respect that Zempo is going to potentially come by seeing this move. It's also fast enough that it's difficult to react to, but it's easier to react to from far enough away. Right? So if I make Ken do things from the pressing buttons, it's very easy for me to frame trap off of using that standing light kick, or walking into range to commit to going for Zempo. So using buttons specifically to condition your opponent to look for them, while also functioning as a way to frame trap, can be very potent. This is also possible just with Dekai, because you're able to walk into range very quickly afterward. As long as you are close enough to your opponent, like if you were to do something like this, it's very easy to just walk into range. And your opponent has to be very careful, because this is a block string. It's also a frame trap, just for a slight timing variance. Your opponent also has to respect that standing heavy punch can come, or a bunch of other things. So all these moves that can be used to open up frame traps also can be used to get you back into range. So like using far MP as an example, like if you're getting pressure, you can use stand light kick to get back in. You can also use far MP as a way to get back in because of how plush you are, and the fact that you get to walk into range for a frame trap more easily than you would off of a crouching light kick, or at least you'll have more access to different moves. So it's also really easy to do medium punch, Dekai, and then follow up with whatever you want. The other important thing about certain moves is that you can Kara to get back into range. So this is why you'll often see particular strings, and they'll use Kara standing light kick as their way to get back in. Either with Dekai, where they'll fully let it recover, and then they'll do it, or they'll do something like this. Because they have to respect that Kara standing light kick can come, right? Or micro walk crouch medium kick can be a frame trap, or another Kara HP can come. Or just walk Zempo, right? Because you're plus 15 off of something like this. So your opponent has to be very respectful of how much you have to walk forward, because the grab range for all the characters in the game isn't the same. So if you're walking forward and Ken's trying to throw you, you're going to be out of throw range, even out of Kara throw range, until you get to like here. So you have to walk a lot in order to get that Zempo, but it's also really easy to frame trap in that scenario because of how much you have to walk, both with highs and lows. So this is why Sho uses this particular string, is because crouching medium kick Kara Fierce is very easy to transition into a bunch of different things that are either a frame trap or a guaranteed way to get back in, with like Kara standing light kick, Kara crouching light kick, Kara crouching medium kick, all these other things. Because doing this is very easy to get into range. I just was 2+ there, and he wasn't able to be thrown in order to get my Zempo, right? So like, there's a lot of timing variance that is on your side, and hard for your opponent to choose how they want to interact, because guest parrying high or low is also a guest parry between a red parry and a regular parry, in a lot of cases, if something is a block string or not. So yeah, the fact that that particular string, I've made videos about it, is so useful, is also the pushback that it actually has towards the corner. So like, if I'm mid-screen and I activate against my opponent, right, I'm able to use that in order to push them to the corner, and it is a block string. So it's the same thing that you would be doing like off of a shoulder. And shoulder is another way that you can actually frame trap, because shoulder is like +5 or +3, depending on the shoulder that you do. So your opponent has to worry about you frame trapping or walking up for Zempo, or walking into range for universal overhead and all sorts of other things. And this is the next thing that I want to talk about, is the mental stack for Zempo, universal overhead, and forward medium kick. I talked about mental stack, and yeah, I talked about Zempo and all the different timings for it and the frame traps and stuff, but universal overhead exists, and it's something that you need to respect, because it does a lot of damage with the combos that it does. And it can be done throughout basically the first 2/3 of Geneijin and still get a combo that is respectable. It's easier to react to because both feet come off the ground. So if your opponent is just looking for Zempo and universal overhead, it's a little bit hard to actually make work, especially if they are on hitbox or something, where it's a little bit easier to let go of crouch block, unfortunately. But regardless, the best players in the world, like MOV and stuff, still can have their mental stacks put to the point where universal overhead works. Part of the reason why that is, forward medium kick exists. They take 11 damage for every forward medium kick that hits them. But the animation for forward medium kick, Yun's foot doesn't really necessarily leave the ground. So this is very good at specific spacings where universal overhead is also strong. Just randomly standing up to guest parry at these ranges isn't necessarily what you want to be doing, right? It opens you up to crouching medium kick to Kai, crouching medium kick Kara Fearsons, or whatever. All that stuff. Frame traps. Blah. But being able to set up universal overhead against specific characters, and especially players that just like to down back, is super potent. Similarly, you can do different strings that set up universal overhead very easily, but also doing something like this. I hit Ken with 2 forward medium kicks, and now instead of doing 37 damage to him, I did 59. So that is a big deal, because using forward medium kicks means that if you're successful with them, your opponent has to be really wary about you actually getting your Zempo off. This can make them a little bit more itchy to press buttons, because inside of Geneijin, even if you make them get hit by universal overhead, in a lot of cases they're going to be -2. The only time that this isn't the case is if you are at like max range, where you're like +1, +2, +3, depending on the character that you're hitting. And the distance at which your plus changes depending on the character and their hurt boxes as well. So it's a little finicky. But in this case, when we're doing pressure, it's very easy for me to go for a pseudo frame trap or whatever, where I slightly delay my next attack to deal with something that Ken might do. So what I mean by this is that Ken can press crouching medium punch or whatever afterward, but I can also just option parry in a direction. And in most cases, it's going to cover the move that is most likely to hit you, that is fast enough. So like Dudley crouching MP, Ken crouching MP, it's only very specific moves you need to worry about that can like go into a super or something. Or in some cases, like down jab super as a punish if Chun-Li blocks your goddamn universal overhead. And that's not something you want to have happen. But it is technically possible, not practical. Most Chuns in these cases will Kara back throw you if they block your universal overhead. And Q can do it as well. Hugo can try to SPD you for it. But realistically, the risk behind going for universal overhead and having it blocked is less than it getting parried, right? So forward medium kick, not having the same animation, also means that it's a lot easier to do, even if the situations occur where the same buttons can yield both things. Where a far MP, as an example, can set up me doing a universal overhead against a lot of the cast. If I'm max range and then I recovery cancel walk forward, right? The opponent also has to worry about, at these timings, me doing forward medium kick, or me just walking up and Zempoing. So using both of these tools increases the amount of things that my opponent needs to pay attention to and worry about the follow-ups for. Whether that universal overhead is going to hit, or I'm going to force it to whiff, changes what my options are. They need to be ready for both. If they can't instantaneously react to the fact that it's not hitting, they're going to get hit afterward, or they're going to get Zempoed for free. So both of these moves are really important as far as increasing the opponent's mental stack, and really important as far as making it so that there's more things your opponent needs to worry about overall. It changes how your pressure looks, and it changes, like, a lot of the things that your opponent needs to think about when trying to interact, because there definitely is an interaction point when they get hit by the forward medium kick, but is it worth risking the down medium punch? Because if I parry it, they're screwed. If I, micro walk back, I can punish. So let me just show an example. So in this case, when I forward medium kick, Ken's going to do down medium punch. As you can see here, I try to do micro walk into range into crouching light kick, doesn't work. If I'm point blank, there's a chance that I hit him and there's a chance that I get hit, depending on when I press my crouching light kick. It's either going to be a whiff punish or it's going to get hit by his crouching medium punch. So just by delaying my decision, that's all that I needed to do. If I hold down back, I block this. But if I don't do anything, it whiffs completely. So I need to be very careful when doing stuff like this. But it's easy to whiff punish your opponent trying to press this button, or option parry into it. Right? So they really need to be very sure of their decision making. It's a very large risk to actually press anything here, even though they're technically at advantage, because they have to hard commit to something. Reacting to the parry into super or whatever can be risky, because of the fact that if they do it too late, then there's a chance that, like, crouching MK trades, and then if they only have one super meter, they're kind of screwed, right? So, it's one of those things where they need to be super respectful. So, like, let's make him super. I can buffer down MK and then hold back and still block this. This also means that I can just buffer forward parry. Right? Obviously I can get a better punish. But you get the idea. Because crouching MP is high-low parryable, high parrying here covers both super and crouching MP. So it's really risky for Ken to make any decision here. Because down parry also covers, crouching light kick or crouching MP or crouching MK, all these things. So he has to be respectful and wait for you to act or hard commit to something to stop you from overpressing. Because if they don't act instantaneously, your crouching light kick beats their crouching MP. And if they do act instantaneously, you delaying your crouching LK by like 2 frames beats their crouching MP, or whiff punishes it. So it's a very awkward scenario. And you can make it so that your crouching MK can cancel into this. Oops. Pretty easily. Where in normal situations, you can't do crouching MK into forward medium kick. But if you press both kick buttons, light kick and medium kick, it basically interprets it as light kick and lets you cancel it. Same thing for if you press light punch and medium kick. So even from far enough away, you can still force your opponent to have to deal with the forward medium kick, even in scenarios where you might be not be able to like hit them, right? Because far MK hits at ranges that far MP does not. Or crouching medium kick, I should say. So, yeah, there's a lot of different nuance as far as using overhead, using forward medium kick as a way to both force a new type of RPS into the scenarios, and also make your opponent respect that Zempo is coming. Because, like I was saying, you can tap forward after your forward medium kick, right? So if they get hit by this, you can tap forward and you're in range for Zempo. So you get parry Zempo as an option that covers the crouching MP or whatever. And obviously certain characters have different moves that they're going to be contesting with, but Ken is probably the one you have to worry about the most, outside of maybe like Chun-Li, because Chun is a frame trap off of her down jab. Even if you block it or whatever. But Ken, Dudley, very dangerous as far as that interaction goes because of crouching MP super. But a majority of the rest of the cast, it's a little bit more difficult to interact well for them. Depending on your execution, and depending on, your opponent's character and stuff, there's a lot of different things that forward medium kick also opens up. So in this case, I'm able to open Ken up with universal overhead after a forward medium kick, because the forward medium kick gives me the spacing that I need. This can also allow me to whiff my universal overhead by tapping back instead of forward. Or, in similar situations, I can do something very disgusting, like a double Kara Zempo. And against certain characters, this sort of situation might work. Against like Shoto's, Makoto, Chun, the characters where double Kara Zempo in the middle of pressure actually functions. And this isn't something that I'm going to suggest that you actually learn how to do. For the most part, it is something that should be ignored. But it is another layer that your opponent actually needs to pay attention to and respect, just as much as the fact that this forward medium kick can just allow me to walk into range and threaten a Zempo, right? So, because of this, and all the different interactions that come from forward medium kick, how it overlaps with universal overhead spacing-wise, how it can set up universal overhead itself, makes it a very dangerous move. And it's almost impossible for your opponent to not be forced to guess after the forward medium kick. But again, it then comes down to how does my opponent actively want to defend? Are they just going to take the Zempo anyway? Do they want to press that crouching medium punch? All that stuff. So the fact that you can pseudo frame trap off of this move, the fact that it keeps you in range to still threaten Zempo, to threaten going back for pressure that is potentially protected by a parry, all of these things make forward medium kick underused, at least in the current day and age. It used to be used a lot more. If your opponent can react to it, though, it is very difficult to make the best of, right? Because if it gets parried, you're up shit's creek. Especially against characters like Urien or something like that, where you're going to get super hard punished when the opponent actually gets a parry. So there is risk reward behind using this altogether, but because of the difference in animations between overhead and forward medium kick, the ranges that you can use forward medium kick and all that stuff, it is still a underappreciated tool. SJC Zempo is not super common, especially in Geneijin, but it is something that works. Now, when doing SJC Zempo, you'll notice that I use light punch, light kick. And this is the exact same reason why, you would do something like this, even if you're not doing super jump cancel, where you're doing a delay tech inside of your Zempo. So if your opponent presses a button, it blocks it. If they try to throw you, then you tech it. And if they just block, then the Zempo occurs. This is something that you can apply to your Geneijin pressure as well, using either block Zempo where in this case, it's a little bit harder to get the timing and the spacing or whatever to make this work because of the parry timing. But as long as you're inputting with down forward and then you're going up to forward without going to neutral, it's very easy to do this. So you can protect against throw just by using light punch, light kick as your way to Zempo, as opposed to doing, you know, like this, which is Kara Zempo. Because even though you get one extra frame of startup time, which can be helpful when your opponent is leaving block stun or positions where they are technically unthrowable, the extra time that it takes you to do your Zempo, while still protecting it from throw, is mitigated by the fact that you are protecting it from throw. So the only thing that your opponent can then do to deal with your Zempo is press buttons, which makes them more susceptible to frame traps. Or simply, instead of doing the delayed block Zempo, even inside of your Geneijin, you can use that super jump cancel to potentially go through the fact that they're going to be actually trying to throw you. So even if I mess up, I'm able to tech, and if I'm successful, I'm able to get my Zempo through their throw. Now, it can be a little deceptive off of some moves, because off of specific situations, it's a lot harder to actually get your super jump cancel based on the plus frames of the move that you're doing and you walking forward and all that stuff, and the distancing. So doing things like close standing medium punch or standing light kick as your way to get back in, you can still use the block Zempo, or you can attempt an SJC, but it's very rarely going to work because of the timing. Unless your opponent has to worry about you being further away with a stand light kick or something, where if they try to throw you, it needs to be at a delayed timing for characters with smaller throw ranges. Otherwise, you still have to walk into range and you're still risking things. But as long as, you know, you are buffering that forward walk in the middle of your button so that you don't eat your own parry, SJC is possible, and so is block Zempo, where you're not actually just going to get thrown for it. So if your opponent likes to defend with throw, their best case scenario in these situations is going to be that you tech their throw and get pushed back really far. And depending on when in your Geneijin that you actually tech their throw, especially if it's very late, it's beneficial to you because then you still get to hold them in the corner as far as spacing goes, right? You don't have to worry about anything. It's the same thing as if the opponent blocked out and you went for a frame trap, ended with a shoulder or something. So this can be super dangerous for your opponent if their main way of defending is trying to back throw you into the corner. It forces them to take that higher risk to press a button in some cases. The downside to this is that sometimes it can be a little bit annoying to do, execution-wise. But it's way more consistent than pianoing your Zempo, because a lot of times when you piano, stand roundhouse might come out. So by doing things in a manner that will allow you to tech, you're actually giving yourself more Zempo consistency. And if you mess up, you're jumping away, in most cases. So, yeah. Even if you are not successful, there is a lot less that your opponent can do as far as follow-ups when you're teching versus you know, their throw being successful and you losing position. So maintaining your ability to hold the corner, even when you are unsuccessful, is something that should be considered, and a lot more players should start to do this. I don't do it enough myself, and this is a concept I've talked about before, but it is very potent against specific players, that their main defense is that throw attempt. One of the most important things when you are activating Geneijin from far away, not necessarily from a blocked move or anything like that, is that you're able to get into range. So the most common ways to do this are Dakai, Dash Punch, where ideally it hits once just like that, or Shoulder. Now, from far enough away, Shoulder puts you at about 131 pixels away. As far as if, like, HP Shoulder hits him multiple times, right? If it only hits him once like this, you'll get a much further distance, which is basically like a Dakai distance. Dakai can hit from very far away, under the timer, or at least to the left of the timer or right of the timer, depending on where you are when your opponent is, like, cornered, right? So the amount of distance that you have to move is still going to be very far from the furthest Dakai. So you still need to be able to get in from here. And this is potentially a problem in some ways. Certain characters do have ways that they can try to contest you walking up. They have further limbs than other characters. But a majority of these things are all lows. So you can preemptively cover them with, like, crouching medium kick into the void, basically. Or you can use something like standing HP. So from very far away, this is a more common thing that some players would do. Or they would look to combine the two, where a very far Dakai could be followed up by Shoulder, and it would frame trap some moves. But it's not guaranteed that that would be an option. So this is where Kara moves become very important. Is from this distance, I'm not able to always Kara crouching medium kick to get into range. But more often than not, I can cover the distance with a slight micro walk. Once I'm in range for this, I still need to get in. And that can be a problem, because from this, I have to do something like Kara Fierce off of this. And this is one of the reasons why crouching medium kick Kara Fierce is so important, is that you get to abuse the plus 15 in order to take the space and force that RPS against your opponent. The other thing that your opponent needs to be wary of is double Dakai. And double Dakai allows you to also close the gap. Because far enough away, you'll notice I'm very close, or I move closer, depending on the recovery cancel of this Dakai. So when I'm far enough away, my Dakai allows me to move into range for another Dakai, which allows me to move into range. So this makes it easier to force your way in from different situations, where instead of you not being able to connect with your next Kara into a normal, your next Kara normal, whether that's standing light kick, crouching medium kick, whatever it is going to work. So the next important thing is crab walk, because this allows you to get into range for Dakai, and it also at some timings allows you to cancel it into a crouching medium kick that's going to allow you to connect. Some players will also um, do sweeps in order to get a knockdown or attempt to like fill the void between the two characters a little bit that will yield a knockdown and force an RPS, right? But the most important part is that it can go into a shoulder or it can go into a dash punch. And these are situations that your opponent has to respect and be looking for, which means that you can do more crab walks. Because once you get to a specific spacing, they then have to respect the dash punch, and they have to respect the shoulder. But at these same spacings, you can connect with the Dekai that's furthest away. And if your opponent is trying to jump away, dealing with that Dekai is something they're thinking of. So like Ken doing jump back roundhouse or something like that might be able to catch it. You'll notice standing medium punch just by mashing the button. I move forward, right? But the hitbox is the red one, which is above the hurt box of the move. So if Ken's trying to jump back and press roundhouse, or another character's trying to jump back and press a button, there's still a decent chance that this move can be timed in a way that's going to hit them when they're jumping. So there's a lot of different nuance behind actually getting into range, and it's not always going to be from the crab walk or whatever, right? You'll see some players do Dekai in the middle of the screen, even though there's not really a way that it will connect. Sorry. But because this Dekai allows you to recovery cancel and take space, it sets things up. So if you double backdash here, and Ken's in the corner as an example, right? You activate, you do this. Heavy punch, dash punch doesn't connect if you don't fully recovery cancel your Dekai. But it does if you do. So using Dekai or using standing HP in some cases is a way to position the screen so that Ken can only move back so much. And this is more important when you're in the mid-screen where Ken is running away and taking stage away from you. So let me control Ken for a second. So in this case, if Yun is chasing me, I can be jumping back, right? And as long as I'm jumping back, the stage pulls with me. So as long as Yun can move forward faster than the stage pulls with this, he can maintain certain spacings for dash punch or shoulder or whatever to actually be a viable option. And especially if I'm jumping, the dash punch hitting me is a distinct possibility, right? I'm not always going to be able to jump back roundhouse and hit the dash punch, but it is something that can occur. So once you're actually able to get into range where you're like furthest range Dekai is where things are a little bit different, like as far as what options you have and what your opponent has to respect. Because getting to this position to begin with is the most important thing. So the other options that you have available obviously are going to be like dive kick into range, where either Dekai or crouching medium kick or whatever is a functional way of connecting against your opponent and forcing some sort of RPS. Or, you know, just empty jumping or walking. All of these things are important when combined. Walking into range, letting your opponent jump back, then dash punch. Same thing, walking forward, going for shoulder at certain spacings as your opponent is jumping backwards, catching them on the way down. All of these things are really important as far as making sure that you connect with your opponent. And once you connect from furthest away, that's when you open up these next options. So once you're at this mid-range, it's either going to be because you're forcing your way in and walking in or something, and connecting with the Dekai, or you're going to be connecting with a shoulder, right? Or you're going to be connecting with, like, Kara crouching medium kick from like far enough range. Or fierce punch. There's a lot of overlap into the choices that you have after all of these things. As far as being able to force RPS or make your opponent respect that Zempo can come, right? So obviously, you can just walk into range for Zempo off of a lot of these things. When you're doing shoulder, as an example, medium punch shoulder is +5, but you have a lot more distance to cover. Same thing with heavy punch shoulder is it's 125 distance, but you're only +3. So back in the day, you would see this a lot because it would open up something like far MP or crouching MK. You'll also see players like Mester use this as a way to force proximity guard so that they can get a pseudo free step in. So you can go for ways to get in like this, or to open up universal overhead after the proximity guard. But the fact that you can frame trap off of Dekai, or frame trap off of a shoulder, or even frame trap off of you just using crouching medium kick. Using crouching medium kick, Kara crouching medium kick, Kara crouching medium kick, Kara crouching medium kick. This is like technically a viable way to pressure, even though it's not commonly seen, right? There is some risk behind it, obviously, but the fact that you can do this, you're not going to be able to get into range off of that far crouching medium kick to actually threaten Zempo. So when you're doing stuff like this, you can use that as a way to get micro walk forward stand light kick, which forces the interaction that I talked about earlier, with that stand light kick threatening Zempo or a frame trap. You can also use it to set up crouching medium kick Kara fierce, which sets up that other situation where you're now frame trapping off of other things. You have universal overhead available to you. You can buffer in forward medium kick to force that other type of RPS. And this is how that sort of mid-range is all structured, is that the goal is to get back into range, and the most common way to do that is going to be using Karas. So whether you're frame trapping or not, it's a lot easier to get into range with stuff like Kara standing light kick, Kara crouching medium kick, Kara crushing light kick, or even Kara fierce, because you're moving forward with that Kara, right? You're not having to walk. It's a commitment to that button, and it happens faster than the walk. So it requires your opponent to instantaneously make the decision: are they going to try to parry high? Are they going to try to parry low? Are they going to sit there? Are they going to try to counterpoke? Because in certain situations, if they try to counterpoke, like crouching medium kick into Kara crouching medium kick is still going to hit them trying to counterpoke with crouching medium kick themselves, right? So there's a lot of overlap in how all of these different moves actually close the gap. And it all has to do with your Karas, or your ability to, commit to things like shoulder if that's how you want to do it. And even though this is something that isn't done as much now, the reason for that is because of how much time it takes, right? I can only do like 5 shoulders total before I get to the point where I need to commit to something to get the Zempo that will give me the timing for the latest possible ender. So if you're doing, pressure, something like this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because you're really far away. So you have to use the shoulder earlier in your pressure. So if you are activating off of like crouching medium kick here, it would make possible sense for you to do a crouching medium kick into a shoulder, or a standing HP into a shoulder, if you're not comfortable doing like Daipon loop, right? Because otherwise, something like this makes more sense, because you can have a lot of variation on how you're going to progress moving forward from there. Whether it is, forcing that RPS off of a forward medium kick, forcing your way back in with something like this, or simply, walking and making them respect the fact that you can walk up. But because all of the moves that actually cover these distances in the mid-range are all plus enough to be a frame trap, means that your opponent needs to be very careful with how they interact afterward. Even though you need to traverse space to get into range to Zempo, you can still threaten with a lot of things. Because, with that medium punch shoulder, I can still carry a crouching medium kick. Or if I do that shoulder early enough, I'm able to threaten with Daipon loop into a Kara crouching light kick or something to get into range, and then either do a frame trap or go for my Zempo, right? Because going for shoulder into Kara Fierce is a viable option against a lot of characters. So you can threaten with that first crouch light kick at max range, and then go for something like crouching medium kick to Kai, or far MP to Kai, or another far MP shoulder, crouching medium kick shoulder, if you think they're going to try to interact, and you'll actually get your launcher, right? So this as a tool also means that, like, Karastan light kick is a viable option. And the other thing that isn't used as much as maybe it should be is Kara standing light punch. Because in this case, it can force proximity guard. So in certain matchups, you can use this to set things up, where you can force the proximity guard, and instead of, worrying about your opponent actually blocking, you're using this to force the character into an animation, and the opponent can still do things, right? But depending on what they're doing, like if they're just down backing, it's hard to react to the fact that you just whiff something and then commit to something, unless they know that that's what your goal is. So doing things like shoulder into, micro walk stand light punch or something, can open up your ability to go for Zempo and stuff as well. The same thing exists off of using Daipon loop. So, you'll see Master do stuff like this, where they'll use that far MP, like I talked about earlier, to get that proximity guard and force their next decision, whether that's an attack or walking into range for Zempo or whatever. So once you're comfortable enough using all of your frame trap options off of Dakai, off of standing HP, and even off of, crouching medium kick, you're going to have a lot of tools available to you as far as forcing your way back in. And having a variety of ways that you can still frame trap your opponents from highs and lows and all that stuff. Forces them to respect all the decisions that you have. So if you are in a situation where you get that, max range activation, your opponent still needs to be respectful of, your crouching medium kick shoulder, your standing HP, your ability to get into range with Karas, right? Because in this situation, from far enough away from my crouching medium kick, I can do that to get into max range for my crouching light kick. And, you can also do double Kara Zempo if you are good at gauging your distancing. And this isn't something I necessarily suggest that you learn how to do, but it is something that all of these far attacks can open up, right? is using these far tools and the distance that you have to cover to go for these sort of advanced tactics can be fruitful, but it's still a very, very large risk to go for something like this. And it's not something that I suggest, just trying to show you that it exists, right? So using forward medium kick as a way to force your way in or force an RPS that can deal with your opponent or make them think is just as important as making them think about the decisions after a Dekai or a standing HP or a shoulder or anything at this mid-range. So the fact that you can, use this far Dekai to go into a forward medium kick or go right into a crouching medium kick afterward or Kara to get into range, there's a lot of variance that your opponent needs to account for. And it's not something that they can defend properly without taking risk. And even just blocking sometimes is a risk. Now that you have a lot of information talking about using different things like frame traps and different timings to actually condition your opponent, or how to leverage space as a way to generate rock, paper, scissors, or even how to convert and cover space if you've activated from far away, even though that was a little bit short. There is one big problem, though, and that is what I call the Geneijin conundrum. The biggest problem there is when actually thinking about conditioning your opponent or varying your decisions and all of that stuff comes from the fact that there are so many varying circumstances that can be generated around Geneijin, because I've activated very far away, and I'm able to connect against my opponent in this exact situation, right? They're crouching. Or, I'm able to force them to block, and then I'm able to activate, and they now have to respect me for 5 seconds, with a different point of interaction essentially every 0.5 seconds. So as long as you are in range to be able to threaten Zempo or threaten a frame trap or whatever, it is the exact same as any other timing. Your opponent trying to throw you early or late or press a button or jump. Their choice to defend, period, is the important part. Because so many of those players opt to just take the Zempo, right? You as the Yun player have to condition very specifically in order to make your opponent actively interact at not random timings. Just because of how all of this pressure and these frame traps and all of this stuff interacts with one another, is it incentivizes pseudo-random engagement from your opponent because you have pseudo-random decision-making as the Yun player. So it can be very difficult to actually realistically condition your opponent to expect things, unless you're using things like a forward medium kick, right? Where it positions you at a specific spacing. Or you're using things like crouching medium kick into Dekai, where it forces a very specific RPS scenario. But that does limit the options that your opponent has to think about, even though they can be just as effective as the situation where you are just in their face doing a block string. And this is why you'll see sometimes strong Yun players give up normal block strings and intentionally frame trap where they're not recovery canceling, getting pushed out and then getting access to those other things. Or those same players will still maintain that block string the entire time. Or add in a frame trap where they're still moving forward, or they can take advantage of something that they think is going to come. But because of how much variance there is from the Yun's perspective, or from the defender's perspective that Yun can do, it is really hard to properly incentivize at specific timings to interact. And this is why that late Zempo timing is the most common scenario that people try to abuse, is because there is this understanding once you get to a specific level where you understand that that is the last point of interaction where Yun actively can get that Zempo into an ender, right? But there's still that risk reward behind, does he frame trap, does he not? Or is he going to maintain the block string thinking that, I'm going to parry to try to deal with his frame trap or whatever is going to come. So like these sort of mind games are very quickly done. And until you're playing against players for a long time or in very long sets, it can be difficult to discern how the player is going to actively approach their offense with Geneijin. And especially if they are varying things to a very high degree, it's almost impossible for you to, as a defender, decide to interact at all. If there's too much variance from the Yun, it just becomes RPS, 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 RPS. And if there's not enough variance from the Yun, it's too easily taken advantage of by his opponent. But at the same time, you might also have to force your opponent to show you they're willing to interact at that point. Which is why you'll see so many Yuns go for Zempo at the same time over and over and over again, even though they know that that's the last point of interaction, or a specific point of interaction that they're forcing that Zempo. They want the opponent to show them they're willing to interact, so that then they can add variance. The same concept exists in Geneijin as every other situation in Street Fighter. If something is working, until your opponent shows you that it is no longer going to work, do it.